it's a very intent based consumption. So people who are tapping into your podcast, they are actually caring about what you are conveying through your medium. So it's not something which is thrown into your face on social media. People are actually wanting to hear from you. So even if it is 1,000 people who are listening to, let's say, your XYZ branded podcast, those 1,000 people are actually caring about what you are going to say, and either they are your current consumers who will build a longer relationship, or they would turn into a new relationship.
Welcome to the Podcasting University. Looking for help on starting your own podcast? Then this is the place to be. We will help you with everything from selecting your topic to promoting and monetizing your podcast in the simplest language possible. Listen to other podcasters who've been through the grind and learn from them as we interview them every week. You can find more details on thepodcastinguniversity.com. Hello and welcome to episode 63 of the Podcasting University. This is your host Dilip, and in today's episode, we are continuing the discussion that we started in the last episode about branded podcasting. And in this episode, I have a very special guest who is going to talk to me a little more in detail about branded podcasting. He is Rohan Thakkar, the founder of EpLog Media. Now, Rohan has been on the Podcasting University earlier, about a year back, where we spoke about everything podcasting, his journey with his podcast, with EpLog Media, and a lot more. Now, in this episode, Rohan is joining me to continue the conversation about branded podcasting, and he's going to talk to us about his experience with creating branded podcasts and what are some of the things that brands can look at if they are planning to get into podcasting. So, without wasting another minute, let's get straight into this conversation with Rohan about branded podcasting. Hey Rohan, welcome back to the Podcasting University, man. It's been some time that we've spoken since the last conversation. After all of those changes that have been there in the podcasting world, I'm sure there is a lot that you have to share.
Yeah.
While we get into the specifics of the topic today, but I'm sure this conversation is going to be very interesting. So, how are you?
Thank you so much, Dilip, for having me back. I didn't expect that I would be back so soon. I think exactly last year we had talked on your podcast, and people actually enjoyed it. So
correct.
It's good that I can speak about few stuff.
Right, and this time it is going to be a completely different, topic altogether that we are going to pick up. So I'm sure this is going to be even more interesting.
I'm sure, and you've built a great platform, Dilip, for anyone who wants to get in the world of podcasts, and kudos to that.
Thanks a lot, Rohan. And I think the support that I'm getting from the podcasting community, from people like you, all of the other podcasters, I think that is also helping build the community. So I'm looking forward to building a community where, as podcasters, all of us can support, thrive. So that's basically the objective. So let's see how it goes.
Yep.
Right. So from a topic perspective, Rohan, today, like what we had discussed, I would specifically like to talk a little bit more about branded podcasting, understand from you, specific aspects of branded podcasting, and how and why brands would want to look at podcasting as a platform. So, lot of things that we would want to get into, but to get started, and for the sake of people who are listening to the term branded podcasting for the first time, can you give me a little bit information about your thoughts about what branded podcasting is all about?
Yeah, sure. So as the name suggests, branded podcast is a podcast which a brand wants to do for themselves. It can be an individual brand, or it can also be like a company who wants to do their marketing efforts in the audio domain. So in plain simple words, that's the branded podcast. And individual also are brands. Like if you consider yourself, you are the Podcasting University, so it's a branded podcast. But you are making it yourself.
When I look at it from a brand's perspective, and this is something that I have, since I've been in the content marketing space for quite some
Hmm.
time, when blogging was picking up, it was
Yeah.
individual bloggers who kind of made it big. And then brands felt that they could use blogging as a platform to
Hmm.
communicate with their customers, with their employees. And then what
Yeah.
happened is there was this trend of every branded website, every website of a brand having a tab for a blog
Hmm.
where they would share specific aspects of it. Now,
Right.
when it comes to podcasting, what according to you, and I'm seeing a lot of brands getting into podcasting as well, but
Hmm.
what according to you do you think is different from blogging, and why would they want to pick up podcasting as a platform to communicate something?
Hmm. So you were bang on there. That when blogs were introduced, so from independent bloggers to professional bloggers to branded blogs, uh, now it's a by default feature for any website of a company to have a blog. So that can be either to update what they are doing, it can be for their employees, or which is also now a newsletter format,
Right.
uh, or it can be for their consumers on what's new coming up, or it can be a how to or an update. So podcasts are also, I believe, an extension of blogs. So a lot of these use cases
Hmm.
are utilized over here as well. And but then again, every uh, just as every blog has its own purpose, every podcast also has its own purpose and its agenda. So it can be whether to communicate with your teams. Let's say we are talking about a massive conglomerate where there are lakhs of people working under them, and it's impossible for having a one-on-one conversation. But if you have a podcast, so you can have interaction, get to know your employees, what's going on in the company. So that's one of the ways to do it. Second can be to your consumers on how it can be a toolkit for your users, like Zerodha does that.
Hmm.
uh, so that's a popular podcast where they are educating their users on entering into stock market. So there
Hmm.
are various
Hmm.
ways, and
Right.
agendas. Agenda is the keyword, I would say, over here.
Hmm. And considering your experience with working with the
Hmm.
brands that you've currently worked with, what do you think is a bigger agenda for companies? Is there something specific that they are kind of looking at, or is it
Hmm.
all of this kind of built into the
So
system?
honestly, brands are in India. They are still exploring what podcasts can do. Little apprehension is there,
Hmm.
but those who are venturing into it, they want to see what it can give to them. Of course, it's not something as massive as what a social
Right.
media does, but then again, you have that user concentration. People are choosing to listen to your voice. So uh, an
Right.
awareness factor is being generated, and it can also be an educative factor as well.
Hmm.
uh, and in a way, it
Right.
it also helps in building a community for between their users. So there can be a more intimate
Right.
experience between the brand owner and their consumers.
Right. So is it's primarily from a customer, as in keeping the customer as a focal point. The podcasts are being targeted towards customers, right? Rather than
That's also a use case, actually. So there are few podcasts which I've come across which are for their internal communication. So there can be a private podcast as well, while a public podcast if there's a very large team. So what's happening in their company,
hmm,
then
hmm,
there can be employee speaks of the month. So things like that. So employee communication is also a good way
right.
to integrate in a podcast.
So those kind of podcasts will primarily be for the, as in it'll be hosted privately and not be available for the public, right?
It may be, it may be like Y Combinator does a podcast, so it's available publicly.
We are about 10 minutes into this conversation today. And since you've been with me until now, I believe you are enjoying this conversation. Now, if you are, then it would be nice if you could take a few minutes and rate this show on Apple Podcasts and write a review for this show in there, because your ratings your reviews helps in the overall ranking of this show on Apple Podcasts. So please take a few minutes out and do write a review there. And if you can share this episode with people you think might benefit from these conversations, it'll do a world of good for the podcast and for me. So let's continue with the conversation now. It's been some time that podcasting has been there, but even if I look at it from that perspective today, podcasting still is very new, and there isn't a lot of awareness about, from a return on investment perspective, what is it that podcasting can give me. So
Mm.
have you seen what
Yeah.
kind of objections or challenges have you seen from brands in terms of getting into podcasting or using as podcasting as a communication platform?
I had come across your post some time back, so which talked about it, that
Hmm.
how can it give me customers? How can a podcast give me customers? So if that is the agenda,
Right.
it can be a little slow process. You will have to work towards it for a longer time. But then again, is it something for your marketing tool? Is it something that you want to do for creating awareness? Coming back to that zero the example, I quite like the concept about
Hmm.
educating their users about stock market through their podcast. So if that is something, you're building a community with your brand. And something that we have done in the past is like keto. That is a classic example where we created a podcast for cancer awareness. And keto, let me tell you, it's one of the biggest crowdfunding
Right.
platforms in South Asia. And the major uh, fundraising happens
Okay.
for cancer care. And we did a podcast on cancer awareness. And uh, uh, did that did those listeners turn into their
Hmm.
consumers? Maybe. But did it help people get educated that something like this can help people to raise funds for medical emergencies?
Hmm.
Definitely yes. And with that, we also managed to raise awareness about cancer, something that is still very much unknown, though it's now a common thing to know that someone in your circle is having cancer. But still, what does that person go through is still unknown. How does that medical care happen is still unknown. Which medical care is right is still unknown. And there are different people trying different
Right.
things so that they can get relief. uh, so this platform, this podcast, it helped them to share their stories, to share caregiver stories on how they have gone through this journey. And also, if someone else is going through it, they'll get
Right.
a helping hand. An agenda, an intention is very important when a brand is
Right.
doing
The
this
objective.
podcast.
Yeah, that's right. What is the objective with which you're doing a
Yes.
podcast? So, Rohan, if I take this example that you just
Hmm.
mentioned, maybe with keto, because I think that's a very
Yeah.
relevant example. So, with this example, if I
Hmm.
am to look at it from as in two content channels, one, let me say textual content. Let me say it was blogs. They were writing blogs, for example,
Yeah.
posts,
Yeah.
and from a podcast, they've now
Hmm.
created a podcast. So if I compare these two
Yeah.
platforms, what do you think are the advantages that podcasting has in comparison to that of a blogging or a written platform?
So number one is the authenticity. Uh, so when you are listening to the person's experience, you immediately connect with them that yeah, I may be going through something similar, or
Hmm.
someone I know is going through something similar. While blog, yeah, I love reading blogs, by the way. And I'm reading daily at least 5 to 6 articles. Uh,
Right.
uh, on an average. So I do love consuming blogs as well. But when you're listening to a podcast, something like this, uh, emotions are connected, which doesn't happen through a blog. And it's of course long form, so one person can of course explain it for a longer period
Right.
than a blog.
And don't do you also feel, because something, because I've been blogging for long now,
Hmm.
and I've been into podcast also for a long time, but do you
Yeah.
at some point feel that stopping somebody in their path? For example, I'm browsing through the website.
Yeah.
I come across an audio, and I hit the play button, listen to it.
Hmm.
Do you think that from a consumption perspective, podcasting is easier in comparison to that of blogging, rather than sitting there and reading an article for like maybe the next 15 minutes?
Absolutely. So, and also it depends on the context. Like if you're in a crowded place, if you don't have the source to listen, then in that case,
Hmm.
reading is of course helpful. Uh,
Ah, right.
but what I have felt is that reading, if summarized, is helpful. If it's something long form, then you would definitely want to view or listen to it.
So how? What's your thought? What's your perspective to how brands are adopting podcasting as a communication platform? Do you think
Hmm.
that as in it is easy, they are easily picking it up, or they are coming up with requirements to create podcasts, or is it that they need a lot of convincing? As in they don't understand. They still are at a stage where they are not understanding the impact that audio can have. So how what's your perspective?
So what I have felt is that uh, the heads or the decision makers who themselves consume podcast, for them
Hmm.
it's not difficult to convince that boss, if you do this podcast for your company, is going to be
Hmm.
helpful. But
Hmm.
again, if someone is coming from more traditional roots, if they have never consumed podcast, like I remember in 2018 we literally had to explain to people what the term
What?
podcast was.
Right.
So brands are opening up to it, and awareness of course there. People are open to explore, but then again, they come to a point of ROI.
Hmm.
So if I'm
Hmm.
spending, let's say, 1 lakh rupees, just as an example, uh,
Uh,
how much ROI will I get out of that? So, like us creators, brands also need to look at the long term game, because this is something which is going to be there for a long time. Now, Keto
hmm.
podcast happened 1.5 year back, but the content is still being heard by listeners.
Right.
It's something that is gold, and still no other uh, podcast has been able to replicate or go beyond that.
Right.
So
No,
the
that's
content is timeless, and people will, you know, listen to it forever, till the time its relevance is there.
right. And if it's evergreen content, I think it just stays there. There is no reason why it should
Yeah,
just fade
yeah.
off. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, like I often come across on YouTube some videos of cover music or any entrepreneurial video which is 7 8 years back,
Hmm.
which was published 7 8 years back. So resurfacing often happens. People, as in when they become mature about a certain kind of content, they will start consuming it more. So it also depends on what kind of content is one brand trying to make. It's not just limited to interviews. There can be so much more things that can happen with audio.
So, something while we were talking about ROI, this is something that, I've asked a lot of different people, all of my
Mm,
conversations. And this is something that I've observed since the time, I started blogging. So whenever I would
yeah.
talk, as in there were people who would consult me on getting started with blogging, one of the primary questions that they would ask me, the first thing that they would ask me is, okay, once I put a blog out there, will we be able to measure the
Mm,
amount of traffic that blog is generating? Will we be able to
yeah.
track? So this tracking, measuring, evaluating,
Yeah.
this thing is the first thing that comes in the discussion. And during blogging times it was easy. All that you need to do is just put
Yeah.
a link which could be trackable, that's it. But from a podcasting
Mm,
perspective, that is very different. If I look at it from a media ad perspective, so if for of all the
yeah.
ads that these brands run on newspapers, on
Mm,
television channels, there
yeah.
isn't a way that they'll be able to track how effective it is. They've put out an advertisement there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Analytics are there for podcasts. Like if you are doing a radio ad,
Right.
who knows who is listening to it?
Correct.
It's
Correct.
just playing on air. Even for a newspaper article, there are so many PR articles which are published down. But is there any return on that? No,
Correct.
or very less.
Right. So that is exactly what I was trying
Yeah.
to understand, because the amount
Mm,
of money that brands spend today on creating, and all of these are nothing
yeah.
but creating awareness in consumers. If you look at it from a
Mm,
television ad
mm,
perspective or a newspaper media ad,
mm,
it's only about creating awareness. But
yeah.
instead of maybe going and putting an ad on an existing in between an existing movie, or maybe a daily soap, if a brand creates a
Mm,
branded podcast, they have
Yeah.
access to analytics which will tell them how many
Correct.
people are listening to them. So I
Yeah.
think that is a very big advantage when it comes to branded podcasting, isn't it?
True, true, true. And it's something very organically it's delivered. So it's not that you are just buy this shoes from me and get 30%
Right.
off. You're not doing
Yeah.
that. You are having conversations and stories around it.
Right.
So if you are let's say I'm doing a podcast with Nike, which I do want to do someday. uh, I would love to talk about sneakers with them, and that that discussion about sneakers, who knows that some Gen Z kid is listening to that and they would decide to buy that limited edition Air Force One shoe someday.
Right.
So these organic conversations are leading to something which will be a lifelong conversion. So you're creating a relationship with your listener,
Right.
who becomes your consumer.
True. Yeah. Yeah, I think if brands look at it from that perspective, as in if they look at it
Hmm.
as creating awareness for their brand and the value that they provide,
Yeah.
branded podcasts, I think it takes a completely different a perspective, and it can give a lot
Hmm.
of benefit to brands.
Yeah. And coming back to the point where we started, it's a very intent based consumption.
Mm,
So people who are tapping into your podcast, they are actually caring about what you are conveying through your medium.
mm,
So it's not something which is thrown into your face on social media. People are actually wanting to hear from you. So even if it is 1,000 people who are listening to, let's say, your XYZ branded podcast,
right.
those 1,000 people are actually caring about what you are going to say, and either they are your current consumers who will build a longer
Uh,
relationship, or they would turn into a new relationship.
And with these branded podcasts, so the podcast that you have
Hmm.
done, what have you observed?
Yeah.
Is it are brands interested in getting as in independent content creators to create maybe about 5-10 episodes for them, or are they looking at content from from contributions from their maybe leadership team?
Both sides. Both sides we have done.
Okay, and what have you seen as in better resonating with the with
Again,
brands?
comes the objective in that case. If we are doing a
Hmm.
business podcast, definitely hiring a content creator to do it may not be the best case scenario. uh, like with
Right.
Upgrad, the president of Upgrad for Business herself was hosting that show. So she brings in a certain power
Hmm.
and authority and experience when she's hosting that podcast. And the guests are
Right.
also in contrast, they are also with the same level and higher, who are talking about a specific thing. So the and again, the audience, who is the audience? So they are the top tier people who are making the hiring decisions, and they are
Right.
deciding that this much should be given for learning and development and upskilling of their employees. This much attention should be given to this. So it's creating a circle, a chain where two experienced people are talking about something very deep about upskilling, and the third person is the decision
Hmm.
maker of a third company, and listening to that they will get influenced. So naturally, a person like me talking about upskilling with a CXO won't make that much impact that the direct parties involved will do. So in that case,
Right.
yeah, of course. But if something that is very chill, like we did with Asian Paints, where we were talking about how people have I'm just giving this example to you. So where we did this podcast, where how people spend their time at home during pandemic, and they turned their house into something much more, because they were doing everything in their home 24 hours. So how
Right.
did they change the
True.
decors of their house to blend it with their personalities in that period? Someone turned it into a house garden, someone turned it into a mobile studio. someone made it into a workstation area, a play area, everything in one place. And how the decors changed with that time, because everyone has changed the decor in that period, even in the slightest way possible, to make it more comfortable to live at home. And we
Right.
did a podcast on that.
No, I think it makes a lot of sense when, and I think most of these cases that we just spoke about, I think creating awareness is the
Yeah,
primary objective behind all of this, and I think that is
yeah,
something that
yeah,
brands can easily achieve
yeah.
through podcasts. As in contrast to a brand expecting
Hmm.
sales to go up using a podcast, I think if they can
Yeah.
create that awareness, that indirectly translates into sales, maybe through word of mouth or
Hmm.
indirect
Yeah,
advertisements, right?
like you said, I just opened your post and I quite liked it. That most effective strategy to use content creation to generate income is to use it as a medium and not a source. So it's
Right.
very much that.
And with all
Hmm.
of these brands, so first of all, are brands approaching brands ready to take up podcasting? Are they approaching, or is it that we have to go about telling them the advantages of podcasting? How is it? What's your experience today? As in, are brands already aware of what the power of podcasting?
Some are, some aren't. So for those who aren't, we are here to educate them.
Right. And so when it comes to these branded podcasts,
Hmm.
what, according to you, do you think are things that a brand needs to keep in mind if they want to put together a podcasting strategy?
One, a open mind, and
Hmm.
thinking that it's a long term game, that you are building something very valuable here, and uh, is going to give a return, if not today, if tomorrow. And
Right.
you are you are connecting directly with your community. That's the second point. People are choosing to listen to you. And third is, of course, the technical aspect of it, that how a podcast needs to be made. So if it also comes down to the format that is being deployed to talk, to convey the message. So if it's an
Hmm.
interview, if it's an internal communications, then I would say that, yeah, uh, having the team is the best thing to have, host the show. If it's something
Right.
else, let's say a documentary, yep, branded podcast can also be a documentary for, which is a very interesting format yet to be explored by many. uh,
Hmm.
so that's something which we are working on right now. And that's where maybe a professional voice will be required. And I would say that, leave the work to the person who is creating that content, uh,
Hmm.
because they know what needs to be done to ensure that your show is going to be heard, or it's going to reach people. And end to end control is very much required over here. Of course, you can do or your bit to amplify it, but an end to end control is what is necessary to make sure that the podcast is being heard. Like, it starts from pre-production, something as basic as
Hmm.
pre-production. uh, the producer knows that the structure needs to be made in certain way. Of course,
Hmm.
as a brand owner, or as a promoter, you are going to give some pointers, and how that needs to be integrated is to be, given to the producer. And then the
Hmm.
production, post production. So uh, yeah, just leave it to the guys who know the best, and you focus on your content. If you are going to host it, or if any other person is going to host it, then have your agenda straight. If that is the agenda that needs to be conveyed, then the host will deliver it in that way. Interesting.
Right. So, good conversation, Rohan. I was, this is a topic that I have been planning for some time, and these days, I see that on LinkedIn also there are some discussions around
Hmm.
branded podcasts. So it made sense for us to kind of do an episode, and some good insights. Nice
Yeah.
conversation.
Thank you. I hope this was helpful for the listeners and any brand who is looking to start their podcasting journey.
Right, right. Definitely. I'm sure some of the basic aspects of getting started with branded podcasting and the expectations with which a brand should get into creating a podcast. I think those are some things which are key takeaways from the conversation that we had. So I'm sure it will be helpful for brands that are planning to get into podcasts.
Absolutely.
Right. Thanks a lot for taking the time out, Rohan, and it was a good chit chat, good discussion.
Yeah.
So let's see how things shape up, and I'm sure we'll get to have more such conversations in the future.
I'm looking forward to it, Dilip. So always a learning experience with you too, Dilip. And when we are talking, something new pops up. So it's awesome to chat with
It's
you.
it's a pleasure talking about podcasting. So that's something that I really love doing. And when I have somebody at the other end who is another podcasting fanatic, then it becomes all the more interesting.
Oh yes.
Right. Thanks, Rohan. Thanks a
Cool.
lot for taking the time out.
Yep.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Rohan about branded podcasting. If you did, then I'm sure you're going to love my last episode about branded podcasting, where we did an intro about what branded podcasting is all about. So don't forget to tune in to that episode and give it a listen there. Our earlier episodes are filled with a lot of podcasting tips. So if you're looking for implementable podcasting tips, then don't forget to tune into our earlier episodes and listen to those conversations in there. The Podcasting University is available on pretty much all podcasting platforms. Pick your favorite platform and give it a listen there. Don't forget to visit thepodcastinguniversity.com for the show notes, the resources, and the printable transcript of this conversation. You'll also be able to subscribe using the links that are available on thepodcastinguniversity.com. Don't forget to join the free 10-day course on getting started with your podcast when you visit thepodcastinguniversity.com. You can also visit thepodcastinguniversity.com/free-guide to join this free course. That's all that I have for this episode. I'll be back again the next week with another conversation about podcasting. Until then, keep listening to the Podcasting University, and you all have a wonderful rest of the week.